All right, this is Transition Services, and I have sent you, or I will be sending you very soon, three documents that I want you to kind of look at as you go through um, reading your chapter, because I think that this will kind of make the chapter more meaningful to you. But I found three PDFs online. One is a guideline for use of employment services in Medicaid program and developmental services. And the reason I chose this one is because it goes over a lot of the employment services and the employment service models. Okay? And then, just as a note of historic relevance, I found a PDF called Sheltered Workshops, and this is done by Claude Whitehead, who was very influential in making and managing sheltered workshops over the years, and so it's kind of like how he's a policy analyst, okay? Um, and so he really was, just having a basic understanding of when you think about sheltered workshops, what are they talking about? And then I have another one, it's at the very top, it says ICF, but it's Customized Employment Competency Model. And this is the one, so sheltered workshops came first, customized came next, and then we had the supported employment models. So that's kind of how you should look at them as 1, 2, and 3. There we go. Okay, so a little bit of the history of transition services. Before the 1960s, we had sheltered employment. And we kind of continued from that, from the 1850s through the 1960s, because that's what we already had in place. And so if you look at what Claude Whitehead wrote, he wrote that sheltered workshops had their beginning in the United States more than 100 years ago. And the first one was organized in 1838 at the Perkins Institute for the Blind. And so they were run by religious or quasi-religious organizations. And just to kind of recap what is in this. And so then in 1965, the federal government, because we had already had a few programs for the severely disabled, and so in 1963 they had enacted mental health and mental retardation legislation. Now in 1965 they expanded it for the funding, and that funding, most of it went towards sheltered workshops. But the problem was there was a much larger need than what we had money for. And so in 1973, if you skip down a little bit, you can see where he writes about that the Department of Labor decided that because many of the workshops provided some form of training, then they were going to continue with that. However, by 1975, with the enactment of 94-142, our special education law, IDEA, they started looking at how are we going to authorize services for this, and so they started doing it through SSI, okay, or Social Security. And so and then he also goes through some of the issues of sheltered employment. So a very impaired population, okay, many of those people who would not have been considered that they would have been able to have had a job in prior years. Funding has always been very restrictive and sporadic. There usually are not a lot of job opportunities in the community, and then the wages that are paid to them are very, very minimal. And so it was really looked at a sweatshop for individuals with disabilities. by many people, which is why this program was ultimately discontinued. But I wanted you to have a little bit of an understanding of where these came from. Okay? So then, now, and that's kind of a overview of the 60s, 70s, 80s. Okay? But now, really in the 80s and 90s, we started looking at transition instead of just career education for individuals with severe disabilities. We started looking at self-employment and customized employment. Customized employment is our next contestant in the PDFs. Okay, so, and I chose this one because it really kind of goes through what each of these areas means. It has a very nice, very pretty little graphic in there on the second page. But basically, customized employment is a process-driven concept and has 4 components. So you've got discovery, you've got job search planning, job development and negotiation, and post-employment support. So this is where we might have somebody going into the workplace and they're kind of like a job coach. And so we find out, in the discovery phase, we find out where can we get a job. Then the job search, we teach individuals with disabilities how to look for a job, the things that they're going to be able to need, how to talk to people. Job development, if they need, we give, then in this section, this is where they would receive particular support for training. And then once they've learned the job and they're doing okay in the place where they work, that's where they get the post-employment support. And this is, the people who generally do this are rehabilitation services. But it's important for teachers to know and understand what is going on with rehabilitation services, because often they will have like a class where in many high schools and sometimes middle schools where our students get these services. And so I really want you to kind of go through here and just look and see what kinds of components and tasks that they have. So if you look on page 4 of this document, you're going to see where they have job search plannings, and it goes from looking at the personal profile, developing a plan, looking at preferences, all of those kinds of things. We also look at job development and negotiation, and it has all these different areas where students can, and I'm looking through this with you right now, where students can actually get more information so we know exactly what we're supposed to be doing. Okay? So I want you to kind of look through this, because I think this was a really nice little PDF that I found that kind of gives a lot of information that the book may not quite be as up to date on. Now, where are we right now? We use self-employment, and we've continued with the customized employment. Now, this last one's the guidelines for employment services from the Medicaid program. So this came out of the federal government. And so when we look at the different individual models, and I didn't put this all in the PowerPoint because I wanted you to kind of be able to read through this and glean what you liked out of it. So you've got individual placement, and this is where they're placed in a job in a community or business that's going to kind of suit their abilities or their preferences. And then we're going to look at how can we give on-the-job training with job skills, work-related behaviors. They're probably going to have a job coach for this. And then we look at self-employment. This is when a person with a disability operates their own business. And this might be when they are going to be inheriting a business from somebody and they happen to be disabled, but they need to have some extra training to help them to work through some of these issues. Now, so what are some different models that might go with each of these areas? So we have what we call an enclave. And this is where a small group of people work in one place, and usually it's no more than 5 people, and they're going to have a supervisor who has also been trained by the rehabilitation services, so they're kind of like a job coach that is retained by the company, okay? And that's their only job. So especially companies like Walmart um, actually hires a lot of individuals with disabilities, and in larger areas they do have job coaches that help individuals to become more um, in tune with their position. So then you also might have a work crew, a mobile work crew. And this is where you're going to have a group of individuals with disabilities, and they're going to be working as a particular unit. And they might work at different locations in their community so that they understand different types of work. And then we look at small business. And a small business is going to operate just like any other small business, okay? So they might have different types of jobs for different individuals. And so one of the things that we really look at are, what are some of the natural supports? And you can look on page 3 if you want to keep up with me. What are some of the natural supports? And we look at supervisors and coworkers and families and friends. So somebody who can give them mentoring and help provide feedback on job support, performance, and supervision. Okay? And so we look at what are the outcomes of employment, all right? And these are just some of the many things that you kind of have to think about when, as teachers, we want our individuals with especially severe disabilities to be able to transition into a job or other types of training, but sometimes they need extra training in order to do that. And so we look at pay and benefits. What are they going to be paid? This was the reason that the sheltered workshops were discontinued. So we can't have a sub-minimum wage just because they have a disability and they can't fight for themselves. So we also want to have some integrated work sites so that they're working with non-disabled peers at the same time. So I want you to kind of go through these and look at some of the information that it gives to you, because I think it's really quite informative. So when we think about transition, what are some of the things that we want to think about? So in the IDEA 1990, we started looking at, that's when we first started having a school-related mandate for transitional services. So this is actually when we started having individuals getting trained in the schools for transitioning to life after school. And then in 97, the IDEA 97, we shifted from looking at educational processes to different types of outcomes. And we weren't just training students to train them for something, we were training students to do something in particular. And then in the IDEA 2004, this is where we're actually aligning their educational program to meet their post-secondary life goals. So when we look, and indicator 13 is the area in the law that speaks to this issue. So the requirements provide that teachers and schools with guidelines, we have to have guidelines for writing IEPs for transition services that meet federal requirements. And then we also have to have age-appropriate transition assessment. So we're going to do a formal assessment and an informal assessment. Informal meaning that we're going to go and talk to them and find out, give them some different kinds of ideas about what they might want to do after school. But formal assessment is where we're going to be giving them questionnaires and actually looking at what they're able to do. All right, so then we look at person-centered planning. And again, that goes back to that MAPS that we're working on in our projects. And looking at self-determination and student involvement. We always want students involved. Now, I've been hearing from people I've been talking to in the community and different students who come and talk to me that in some of our school districts, they are saying that students don't have to be involved in the IEP. Actually, the law states that they are supposed to be involved in the IEP whenever advisable. Now, what does that mean? Can a 6-year-old go to an IEP? By all means. Should somebody who is 17 or 18 getting ready to leave school, should they not have to go to their IEP? My opinion, we should pretty much be having them there, okay? We need to make sure that our students learn how to be self-determinant and advocate for themselves, and we can't do that if we aren't helping them to be able to manage being at the IEP. We also have to teach employability skills. So that's why I wanted to show you these different PDFs that I found, because it will help you to understand how to go through this, especially if you wind up teaching in this kind of a classroom or if you're already teaching there. Looking at what kinds of, if we're looking at a technical education for those who will be able to be interested and be able to manage that, we need to have some instructional options. So we need to have some place where our students can go to be trained, and also where they can have internships. So we need to have funding, we need to have some space, and we need to look at what is the quality of that training. So one of the first places we can start is on-campus jobs, doing different things around the school where they can start learning how to manage that job. Job clubs and vocational and student organizations, and then Department of Labor considerations. We need to always make sure that anytime we have a job club, anything that students are getting paid for, we need to be sure that we have access that Department of Labor and we know exactly what it is. So we want to go through the FLSA, which is the Fair Labor Standards, and you can find those online. And you also want to be sure and look at those, how your participants are treated when they are in the training site. Also, we're going to be looking, you want to look at teaching employability skills or employment skills. So this is where you have that community-based instruction. I know it just keeps coming up and popping up, those words over and over, right? So there's different types of CBIs. There's job shadowing, there's an internship, there's an apprenticeship, volunteerism, basically they volunteer for the job, okay? Mobile work crews or enclaves, and competitive employment. And so when you're doing your CBI, if you want to choose one of these types, you are more than welcome to do so, because that is what is acceptable in the training systems currently. Staffing considerations, you have to look at, can your teacher or your assistants be used as job coaches? Okay, often that's one of the jobs of the teacher when you're running one of these programs in a high school. How do you do therapeutic support? Do you have any therapeutic support that you can use? Can you do team teaching, or how are you going to train your paraprofessionals to help out with this? Often we forget about training those paraprofessionals. Okay, so we want to make sure that we have a plan for that. Some transportation considerations. We want to know, do we have funding to get our students from the school to their training site? All right. Do we have licensed staff? So when we're using a bus or other type of vehicle, Do we have somebody who has been trained and appropriately licensed to do so? Looking at when and what type of transportation is available. And then are we going to have to use public transportation? So what kinds of other options might we have? We might want to look at safety considerations. So we always want to make sure that our parents know exactly what their students are doing. We want to look at those, what types of community-based instruction settings we have available to us, and what are their expectations for behavior. So we have to make sure that we teach that before our kids go out into those settings. We also need to know, we have parents provide their medical information for the students. Because if something happens on the work site, we need to be able to take care of it immediately. We also have to make sure that everybody's wearing name tags and carrying their cell phone so that if somebody needs to get in touch with them, that we can. Now, this means that we need to practice this in the school setting. Each one of these you can do a CBI for. Wearing those ID tags around school. Now, while sometimes they might feel self-conscious doing that, we need to also make sure that the other students in their classes understand that this is part of their training and that this is part of what they have to do in order to get used to doing it when they're at work. And then training for work safety. We have to train work safety before you do the CBI. So when you're writing your CBI, if you're going to do one for high school, I would consider looking at these considerations while you're putting it together, so that you can say, okay, we've already done the work safety, okay? You can put in any kind of caveat that you need to in order to do your CBI, okay? So don't make it bigger than it has to be. So teaching employment skills, looking at the insurance coverage, okay, we've gone over that, and the Fair Labor Act, you might want to look that up, okay, because I didn't put it in here. So how are you going to provide the instruction? Okay, you can look at whole task chaining, and I think I have already done a short lecture that I have recorded on task chaining. So if I can find it, I will put it up there for you guys. If not, I will make one. Constant time delay and self-instruction. And so I will put something up there so that you understand how to go about doing that. And a task analysis, all right? Everybody's going to be doing at least one task analysis, so you're going to pick one task in your CBI of how to do a task analysis. It's very important when we look at that instructional data that we always have that task analysis available for difficult tasks so that our students know what it is that they need to be able to do. And because if we don't do that, then we're not going to really always understand exactly what they need to be taught. We also need to know, are we going to have any assistive technology? Most likely we will, of some sort, okay? Whether it is very low level, like just signs for them to remember what it is they're supposed to do, to maybe having a communications board. Okay, so when we look at some of the outcomes, we want to look at, and I don't know why it came out like this, it looks kind of strange, okay, so I apologize. So we look at individual placement, we look at that model, and you can go back and you can read a whole bunch on that because it's not covered as, it covers it in the chapter a little, but this I think was a little bit more in depth, okay? So we look at how we have one individual with a disability in an integrated setting, and usually they have a job coach. Now the job coach first will stay with them all the time, and then they kind of wean themselves off so that that individual is more independent. We also look at small business models, and you might have a group of individuals who actually work at a place and they have one coach and they work with everyone. So again, you have that mobile work crew, chief, okay, and they're going to be working with individuals, and they might be working from site to site, going to an enclave model. So, and I've kind of gone over that already because I kind of got ahead of myself. So I got so excited about my PDFs that I had for you. So then some natural supports. We look at what kind of support can we give or can this individual get from supervisors or coworkers? We might need to train them specifically so that they know what it is that they're supposed to be doing. Making and maintaining friendships and being able to socialize appropriately. And being able to give them appropriate feedback, and that is very, very important. So that might be something that we have to teach them how to give that feedback. So again, with the customized employment, you're going to have that individualized relationship, and it's going to be that employment position is specifically tailored to that individual. Okay, so what are some of the family roles? We always want to make sure that we include family involvement when we're doing any kind of strategizing or transition services with individuals with disabilities. So, when they're in elementary, we're going to have elementary teachers talking to families about, at some point, we're going to be doing transition and they're going to learn an employment skill. And then as they go through middle school, we're going to start talking about it more and more. So we also can provide opportunities for parent training. Okay, and not just parent training in the way of how do you become a better parent, okay? But how do we help this child that we have with this severe disability? Just because kids don't come with instructions doesn't mean that we can't make some instructions along the way. We also want to make sure that our parents are informed, because there's one thing that really irritates parents of children with especially severe disabilities is when we decide as the teacher or as the educational entity that we know way more than that parent does, and that we know what's good for them and that parent doesn't have the faintest idea. It really irritates people, and parents especially, when that happens. We also want to avoid using jargon. Say the word out, okay? If we're going to use the word IEP, say individual education plan. We need to get away from using jargon because a lot of our families do not understand what we're talking about. Be considerate and very sensitive to cultural diversity. Find out what parents are interested in. Find out what families in general feel about disability. How can we best help everyone in the family to transition? And then establish a network of support for the parents, because parents need that support as well. Okay, so finally, looking at interagent collaboration. Now, I didn't list a whole bunch of them here, but I think that is actually going to be your discussion board, okay? I want you to find different types of services. I want you to find one service from each one of these areas, okay? So a vocational rehabilitation service, a developmental disability service. Because kids with severe disabilities, generally speaking, we're talking about kids with autism, kids with intellectual disabilities, CP, deaf, blind. There are a lot of different disability service areas out there. I want you to find one of them. What is one thing that the Social Security Administration can do? I want you to look up one thing and report on that. And then your one-stop career center. Is there any place like that in your area? If not, think about what it would be like to have a one-stop career center in your area. Now, I know some of you are not here in Albuquerque, okay? So, and you're in rather rural areas. So kind of, you know, sit and brainstorm what this might be like and how it might affect your area.